Well, good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Arizona Small Business Association and our board of directors, welcome to Arizona Speaks, the state of small business. Thank you for joining us today. ASBA has an awesome event planned, and I can't wait to get started and delve into the many economic contributions of our small business community, particularly over the past year. My name is Eric Knott. I am the chairman of the board for the Arizona Small Business Association and the principal of Fine Point HR, which is an HR consulting firm. At ASBA, we understand that our small business community's overall health and vibrancy are vital to the Arizona economy, and we are committed to ensuring that they have the tools, resources, and competitive intelligence needed to recover and thrive. Today, we'll highlight just how important small businesses are in powering our economy and what we can do to continue to support their recovery. So, without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce today's moderator, Jen Daniels. Jen, thank you so much for being here. Jen's been a longtime champion and advocate for the small business community, dating back from her time as a council member and mayor of Gilbert. Under Jen's leadership, Gilbert's businesses flourished, and she is passionate about growing the state's economy. Jen currently serves on the state's transportation board and also owns and operates her own small business. She's a busy lady. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Eric. And thank you so much to ASBA for hosting this wonderful event this morning. I can't think of a better way to start off a Tuesday in December than talking about the economic outlook for 2022 and what we can all do as small business owners to really grow and to build back better, as we like to say. So thank you. Appreciate it. We're excited to today we have Jim Rounds with us. Jim is a national and probably international, Jim, you have to fill in the international part for us, expert in economics, owns a fantastic consulting firm here in Arizona that I know a lot of our cities and businesses utilize his services. Grateful that you're here today, Jim, and really excited for the conversation that we're going to have. Especially excited because I always feel like December is a critical month for us in small business. So many of us have businesses that are really busy. If you're in the retail or restaurant industry, this is one of your busiest months. And if you're not, it should be one of your busiest months as you prep for 22 and what that really looks like. So I get excited about the planning, the goal setting, and all those different things. Jim, you are a small business owner. What are you doing to prep for 2022?
I guess it depends on what industry you're in. If you're in retail, you're really hoping to maximize what's happening now and then try to manage the workforce issues coming up. If you're in politics, like myself, you're trying to rest your nerves before the political season heats up so you don't end up running short in that marathon in case it lasts for a long time. But that's the neat thing about small businesses is there's a different story for every business that's out there.
No, you're so right, and we do expect 22 to be a political year that will be, let's call it, busy in Arizona with the top 5 statewide offices up for election, with individuals who have both termed out or determined that they're running for other offices. So politically, there's going to be a lot going on, and also as a small business owner, we're trying really hard, and it's a pretty difficult process to try to track what's happening in Washington and how that will affect our individual small businesses. Can you give us some insight into what you're hearing and seeing and what you anticipate we need to be really looking at, both at the state and the national level?
Yeah, so at the national level, the key things to pay attention to, one of them has to do with the transition away from the stimulus packages that really went to the individual to infrastructure packages and things like that. So there'll be additional business development opportunities, but it's going to vary. One thing that we have to be cautious about is I don't see a recession, national recession, in the next couple of years, but you start to see signs of some inconsistencies. You may have read that we had a pretty weak job growth month in November, but it was just one month. You got to look for maybe 3 or 4 of those. But if the Federal Reserve starts to get some pressure to maybe pull back a little bit on bond purchases, and we have interest rates go up, um, that'll put a little bit of pressure on individuals. I feel like we still have opportunities. There's a lot of job opportunities. It's difficult for the businesses to find these, and part of it has to do with the COVID hangover, with people just thinking, you know what, I was actually kind of happy spending more time with the kids or more family time, and some aren't coming back. But we're losing a lot of retirees, early retirees, because their home values are so high, and their retirement is very healthy. And some of this is, it's not a bubble, but some of it's a little bit artificially high. But we're going to have an issue with trying to get some of these really skilled workers, which means it kind of trickles all the way down to even the entry level workers. So there'll be upward pressure on wages as well. And in Arizona, we're doing great. The U.S. is only about 83% recovered from COVID. Arizona is already fully recovered. We'll be a top 5 state in most economic categories going forward again. So the opportunities will be there, but we have to get past some of this stuff that's beyond Arizona, these national issues. But I'm very, very optimistic about Arizona and the Arizona small business opportunities.
Yeah, I'm optimistic as well, and I see tremendous opportunity, especially with the influx of individuals coming into our communities daily. I mean, just the demand for housing. I do want to talk a little bit about housing because it impacts all of our small businesses, and I'm not sure everybody really captures what the shortage of housing that we have right now in our state means to the small business owner. Can you talk a little bit about that connection and link? And let's connect those dots for listeners and viewers today.
Okay. Uh, there's been a lot of discussion about housing prices, and there's two camps. One is a group of economists that are just wrong, that believe that when housing prices are this high, it's because of the strong economy. Well, that's the case if you don't have all these other irregularities happening. Uh, we have artificially high prices because in housing, because we have high labor costs, we have high material costs, and we also have a lot of investors, especially in areas like Arizona. We had very low interest rates, and so for some context, if you have about a $400,000 home, the difference between what the interest rate would have been in normal conditions versus what it is right now supplemented your home by about $60,000. But the problem is housing appreciation has gone up by more than that. So people aren't really still on the positive side of the ledger. But if it becomes a persistent problem, then we wind up with a situation where it's not going to sabotage a big economic development deal that ends up requiring the supplies of small businesses. And so, even the large ones have impacts on small businesses and vice versa. But we have to do something, but we can't just say, here's a bill at the state capitol to fix it. One of the issues is we need cities to be a little bit more open to talking about what it takes to get workforce housing in. We have to work on some of the fine tuning things like any tax credits and make sure we have a good return on investment. So it's a problem that's not going to be resolved right away. And a lot of the individuals at these small businesses, we have high wage small businesses and low wage small businesses. They can't afford to live in just basic 2 bedroom apartments at this point. That's a problem. That's something that we need to fix. Normally, I stay away from the more socioeconomic ones, but this is pure economics. This is something that could help us in the long term or hinder us depending on how skilled we are at fixing it.
And when you look at densely populated areas, and Phoenix is definitely what we would consider now one of the densely populated areas in the country, what happens oftentimes is the individuals who work in our small businesses may have to commute farther than they did previously in order to obtain quality housing. That longer commute impacts a variety of things, including things like air quality, which is something we're constantly looking at in the state of Arizona because of the rules and regulations around that. But more than that, and probably most importantly, is the quality of life for the individuals who work for us and work with us. And so, I know keeping all of that in mind, recognizing the strain that they might have on those resources, whether it be transportation costs or just time resources. I just think we need to just be cognizant of that and really have that conversation with our team members and the people that work for us and alongside us. That we make sure that that's an open conversation and dialogue. Jim and I are gonna I have 5,000 topics we could cover today, but we also want to make sure that we get questions from you all. So if you have a question, please put it in the chat box and we will make sure that we ask that. Jim is the expert here. And so it's not every day we get to talk to an expert. So let's make sure that we ask those questions of Jim and get some good time. How important is online presence and marketing right now in what we might consider to be the new economy or the post-COVID economy? It seems like everywhere I look, we're ordering things and having things delivered to our door, be it food, goods, groceries, all sorts of things. How important is that for our small businesses? And how important is the experience that people are having when they frequent our small businesses? Or interact with us. I think they are expecting a certain customer service level when they do get a real human face to face. So can you touch a little bit on that, Jim, and how it's affecting the economy?
Yeah, what's really interesting when you go through these economic ebbs and flows. So after the Great Recession, we thought that there was going to be a temporary shift in terms of what the product that people want. And all of a sudden, we went because it was so severe and it was long lasting. The social, psychological, and socioeconomic issues caught up with it, and so we did see a shift to more multifamily and things like that. Well, right now, because the COVID recession was actually fairly short, but it stung really badly, and it really stung lower income individuals. It stung a lot of small businesses, especially ones in leisure and hospitality, restaurant. But when things sting, that means that you end up with permanent changes. And I, for one, am enjoying the fact that if I'm not feeling great, I can still go out and get a nice meal and not worry about it getting delivered. The, People have adjusted to the fact that this is going to be permanent and they're more efficient, and so then the consumer expectations go up if a business isn't keeping up with this new trend, and I'm saying trend because it's going to continue, then they're going to lag behind. And it's going to be very, very difficult for these businesses because, like you said, people are going to want to have a great experience in picking up or delivered. And with the restaurant, they're going to have a great experience as well. You have to have the right staff, but the staff has to be affordable, so make a profit. It's going to be a problematic time, but over the next year, but a lot of good opportunities uh, during this year and then beyond that.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. You know, it was interesting as we sort of shift to this delivery economy. And I started paying a little bit more attention to how things were packaged and how things were being cared for. And when I do go into a store, I just went next door right before we came here today to get my coffee this morning, and saw the store owner and gave her a big hug and just thanked her for all the work that she's done to keep her small business open. So shopping local is still critically important, and we want to ensure that message is not lost, but also paying attention to that customer experience, whatever the interaction might be, whether it be online or whether it be in person, and just having that time, I think, is important. We have a great question from Jay McCall, and I'm so glad that you asked this, Jay. I had water on my list, but it was probably like 10 or 11. So I'm glad that Jay McCall asked this question. He said, what about water and the impact that has on growth and the economy in Arizona? And so I'd love to hear what you think on this, Jim.
So I've given so many presentations over the years, and it hasn't been until about last year where I started putting water on my slide that says lots of things make the economy tick. And then I go through each of them: transportation, workforce, tax policy, regulation. Water is on there because it's something that we're going to have to manage better going forward. There are a lot of discussions out there among economic development groups talking about water issues when there's business locations happening in some of the areas like Pinal and others, utilities are brought in, and water questions and electricity questions are all asked and answered. But it's something we have to manage better going forward. And doing a little bit of a research for Central Arizona Project recently, it forced me to go back and look at some of these water economic books that you normally don't read on your own on the weekend, but if it's an assignment, you have to get into a little bit. And part of it's going to be we're going to have some government interference. Part of it's going to be the market is going to be more efficient at the use. On the government interference side, I'm really excited about the small chance of getting into this environmental tech area, which would be something where we would develop a strategy for the state if some funds are provided. And part of that would include better management of water resources. Ultimately, the end game is going to be you price it higher and people are going to use less. So we will be able to manage it, but you don't want to get to the point where you have a lot of these very difficult challenges. You want to have it where people can make choices, and we still have that going on. But this is something where that water might be my 10th bullet point. Next year, it might be my seventh. The year after that, I'm hoping it doesn't keep going up. I'm hoping it goes back down as we continue to improve. But yes, I'm glad that was brought up because that's kind of the forgotten economic fundamental. We always talk about roads and other things, but water, again, until recently, hasn't been at the forefront.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, because, as I led a community like Gilbert that has had tremendous growth over the last 15 years, we went from primarily a rural farming community to being a community that was growing families instead of vegetables or fruit or hay or cotton or something else. And so I just want to sort of to highlight the fact that as we see farms and rural water sort of be less needed in the metro area, it's actually really important to note that houses use less water than farming does, and our ability to capture that, clean it, and then put it back into our groundwater supply, which is something that I know we were really proud of in Gilbert, and lots of communities are doing the same thing where they are using that affluent water to continue to replenish groundwater supplies. So again, to your point about us getting more efficient with it, farming is actually a little less efficient. That is not an argument to stop farming or to have our food be from farther away. That actually creates other types of challenges and issues. It's just an acknowledgement that people actually use less water than it takes to grow crops. And so I just kind of wanted to highlight that yes, we are concerned about water supplies, and we are doing a lot in this space. I also am oftentimes thinking about this shift that needs to occur from this being a water scarcity issue to a water infrastructure issue. If we can sort of shift our thinking on that, there are a lot of solutions to water challenges, but they require big investments, usually a lot of dollars, some research. But we are looking at technologies all across the world. Israel is absolutely on the forefront of desalination and some of the other things. So, what does it look like from an infrastructure perspective, rather than from a scarcity? You only get what you have in your circle, your region, and so let's talk a little bit about water infrastructure. We see Lake Mead. I'm so glad everyone is talking about this now. That was about 5, 6 years ago that no one wanted to talk about water. It just wasn't like a sexy topic to have. But now we get to talk about it in forums like this. So let's talk about the infrastructure component of water. How does that then affect our economy? And what are some of the possibilities if we start to really think about this all the way through?
So at the business development side, and this could be large businesses and small businesses, I would love, again, for Arizona to be the leader in environmental tech with some emphasis on the water component of what we're talking about. But we have to have an overhaul in how we think about public policy. And what I mean by that is, in everybody that is an ASBA board member understands that you have to think in these terms when you run a business. If I'm going to invest in equipment for my crew here, I'm not going to treat it as a negative in terms of my dollar amount because of the initial outlay. I'm going to make that decision if I'm going to make essentially a normal profit or more on that with higher productivity later. So you look for a return on investment. The problem with government is that the vantage point or the distance that they look at is so short. You look 1, 2, sometimes 3 or 4 years out at most. But these bigger picture issues like workforce training, infrastructure, all that other stuff requires a longer term vision. But if we can start to be more quantitative and monetize how we look at these things, if we can put some context into what happens if we indeed become like the U.S. hub, similar to how Israel is in advanced products and everything else, not just water, but in a lot of other areas too. It'll take some initial investment. Well, we can calculate how long it'll take to get that return on investment. Sometimes that's beyond the policymakers' expected term in office. We have to have policymakers that think beyond just their term in office and think about longer term legacy items. I'll run for office one day, but I'm not going to bother until I get to the point where I'm going to be happy to get elected than not reelected, because I'll be bringing up long term things and complaining about things like I normally do. And I'm sure you did too on occasion. But we need that we need that longer term vision. So it's part of its economic development strategizing, and part of it is just doing the right thing when it comes to investment. We need to bring these small business principles to government when we can.
Yeah, and I think that that's maybe a call to action for the individuals who are participating today. If you've ever felt an interest in running for office, we understand that this is a political climate that can be difficult to navigate, but we need small business brains and minds to be able to come forward and to utilize the skills, the management skills, the policy skills, the research, the data, the information. You're processing all of this on a regular basis as part of a small business, wearing multiple hats, willing to shift topics based on whatever the need is. We need those brains in elected office at all levels of government. So that was my little plug to, if you've ever felt, I might be speaking directly to one of you today, you'll know who you are. But it's music to my ears to hear Jim Rounds maybe running for office someday. So that's exciting. That's exciting too.
Well,
Okay,
before I do, I have to get a better video camera because my background's making me look like a ghost. I promise I'm healthier than I look on the screen right now. But I'll visit a small business and buy a new camera now.
there you go. That's perfect. You mentioned workforce and workforce development, and I think our small businesses have been pinched pretty hard by the labor shortage. And also individuals. I saw a sign the other day that said hiring for people who show up. And I just thought that if that doesn't explain, you know, the pain of being a business owner or working in a business where you're having to pick up the slack for someone else who didn't show up today, tell us about the workforce and the labor shortage, and then we'll transition to workforce development because that's a key component and really, I think, a focus of our state. So let's talk about the labor shortage. What does that mean to our businesses? What does that mean to our economy in Arizona?
I like to talk about this more from a little bit more of a micro perspective. I had to do an analysis, a pro forma for a restaurant to get some context and how some tax policy might impact it. And it's remarkable how small changes in like a minimum wage requirement or some other tax issue impacts profitability. So looking at the numbers, it made me really understand just the small margins that a lot of these businesses have. Also, in looking at a minimum wage issue as it related to business, try to figure out how different changes in minimum wage were going to impact a business's ability to stay afloat. I had to go do some interviews, and there were some business owners that were just in tears with some of the, and this was before the pandemic, tears about how they're going to have to shut down after 30 years of being where they are, or they might need to go to a different community. Very small changes in bad public policy, or I don't want to say bad public policy, but not well considered public policy. Very small changes can have a dramatic impact. And then more on the macro side, I don't see this letting up anytime soon. So we're going to be in a situation with higher wages that'll get passed on to the consumer eventually. It's a little bit sticky down because sometimes businesses want to hold off on raising prices. You don't want to be the leader in that. But a concern is that some of the bigger businesses that can maybe absorb some of these hits over a certain amount of time are going to crowd out the smaller ones. And after another year or two of this, we're going to have fewer of the mom and pop restaurants to go to, and there's just going to be an Applebee's on every other corner. Not that there's anything wrong with Applebee's, but I'd rather go to something that's local, that's been here for 30 years, and you know the people behind the counter. So some pressure going forward, but remember, we're in a state that has a lot of opportunity. We're in a state that's going to continue to grow, lots of different business opportunities. Again, top five in job growth, population growth, income growth. Um, if you're going to succeed, it's going to be here. There's just a lot of stuff that we can't control.
You just mentioned top five in income growth, top five in several different areas. Can you deep dive a little bit on that, Jim?
Yeah, so pretty much every decade since World War II, Arizona's been top five in these key categories. The where we fell behind was the Great Recession because that was a very, very different recession. And so we were 50th in the country in job growth for one particular month. And then we picked back up, but we finished the year, I think, 49th. Now we outpace the rest of the country, most of the rest of the country, on the minimizing job losses through COVID, and then getting the recovery back. We're not number one because you always have a state like Idaho where another Circle K goes in on the corner and McDonald's opens up, and you double your employment base, and so they have a higher percent growth in jobs. But states that are a little bit more sizable, it's a little bit more difficult to post these rates of growth, but it's still strong. We have to work on raising incomes, though, compared to our economic development competitors. We're still lagging some on average wages, per capita personal income, gross state product per person, all the different measures. But the nice thing is that what I like to see is a curve that's been going down for a while, all of a sudden starts a curve back up. We're right on this cusp of these numbers improving. And so we need some really strong public policy for the rest of this decade. And my goodness, I think we'll be leading the rest of the country if we do it right. If we manage the rest of this decade properly, we will be number one. And it won't matter if Idaho adds another Circle K. It's going to be us because we're creating higher wage jobs. So a lot of work in front of us. And I'd like to reiterate what you said. I would love for all the small business owners and the organizations to be down at the Capitol banging their fists when they don't like something. It was more virtual over the last couple of years, but we need more strong advocacy at the Capitol. Sometimes I feel like I'm a little bit too outspoken because that's just how I am. But I'd like to see more of that. I'd like to see more people getting really fired up about public policy, and I'm hoping that we'll see that.
Yeah, I think as we can, connect the dots of the impact that public policy has on our day-to-day lives in Arizona. I always felt like that with local government. Like if you didn't get your trash picked up, you knew that you were going to make a call and say, "Hey, my trash didn't get picked up." But if you go to the state level and you're not paying attention to some of the legislation that's being passed there, there's going to be some sort of water tax or something that's implemented that you didn't call anybody about until all of a sudden it starts to hurt later on. So a little bit more of a delayed reaction when it comes to state policy, but no less impactful on our day-to-day lives. And so I think that's why organizations like ASBA are so critically important to be continuing the conversation and to be advocating on behalf of small businesses at the Capitol with our policymakers, building those relationships to make sure that the voice of the small business owner is heard. And so I'm really grateful for ASBA and for them stepping up and really making the effort to follow those trends, the things that we're seeing. And, I anticipate that this will be a robust legislative session. We've been talking a lot about the fact that we have more freshman legislators than I think we've had in a long time. A lot of individuals, if you haven't been reading the Capital Times, a lot of individuals have resigned from office to run for other office or for other opportunities. And so we're expecting sort of a brand new legislature in January, and the impacts that that has on public policy. Jim, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. In addition to that, looks like conservative estimate is that we have about a $2.4 billion surplus in the state. above and beyond. And just to put that into perspective, the state legislature last year passed a budget of about $12 billion. So to have a $2.4 billion surplus is a big deal. And that usually means a longer session with probably some more open fighting between our legislators, hopefully not the physical kind, although that has happened before. So, Jim, touch a little bit on the anticipation for this next legislative session and the policies that you're hearing may be proposed.
So first on the surplus, keep in mind that we've had a lot of federal dollars flowing into the different states. We were frustrated because there were no official state estimates, so we did our own, and we think about $500 million in the state's current budget is transitory. $500 million over 4 years is $2 billion. So they will need to be a little bit more cautious. But at the same time, if you want to get something done, you have to strike while the fire's hot, and we'll see how they balance that need to be cautious versus trying to get a few more things done in the next year or two. The next governor will have some challenges, but some great opportunities coming in related to the budget. So I expect to see, like you said, a lot of discussions and a lot of negotiations. There'll be tax credit discussions, things like that. But I also wanted to touch on something that you mentioned about ASBA itself. I do feel like the organization is becoming more and more relevant. I think part of it is good management, solid board members, and I think part of it is the economic conditions that really brought small businesses to the forefront. Because 5 years ago, if I had to do some research, I probably wouldn't have had ASPA on my list. If it's small business related, it'd be one of the first groups that I would call and say, do you have any insight on something where I need to know, if you've tracked members' opinions on item A or B or C. I feel like it's a different organization than what I remember from a while back, and so I'm equally enthused that I feel like I don't want to say influence. No, I want to say influence. The ability to influence policymakers and other business leaders to advocate for doing the right thing, but then having the skills to go back and say, and here's the math on why, and here's the storytelling that you need. And then I feel like the small business community is going to be more engaged. So I'm very excited from what I'm seeing with ASPA itself.
Yeah, likewise. Interesting, and hopefully a message that the viewers and listeners can take today is when ASPA sends out those surveys, when we are seeking out the opinion of our small businesses, it really is so that we can effectively represent the voice of ASPA with our policymakers. So please respond to those. Give us your opinions. Don't feel like you have to be, politically correct or anything else. We need to hear directly from the small businesses in order to make sure that voice is heard. So I think you can expect more of that from ASBA in the coming year, and the continued dialogue will be critically important. I want to go back to workforce development. There's a bunch of organizations in the state. Last year, there was some legislation passed that allowed our junior colleges or community colleges to issue four-year degrees, and now I'm seeing some talk underground, if you will, about our technical colleges and our specific trade schools being allowed to offer an associate's degree, that they may be seeking that permission from the legislature. We're all up leveling here. What do you see from a workforce development perspective? What are you seeing happen with both curriculum but opportunity to ensure that our workforce is properly tooled for the jobs that need to be done in Arizona?
Good news, bad news. Bad news first. We are stretched thin in terms of our workforce skill set. And if we want to maintain all these great business locations and the thriving state economy, we have to step it up on the workforce side. You can stretch things a little bit for a couple of years, but the writing's on the wall that we have to do things differently. On the community colleges offering four-year degrees, it's actually quite expensive. We're not going to see a huge volume in that, at least in the initial years. But businesses like TSMC and others that are primarily looking at technical associate equivalent degrees, I think that one will take off a little bit more. That'll probably have a bigger impact than the 4-year degree offering from the community colleges. It's not just the ability of a community college or some other institution to say we're going to train somebody. Like if you take a look at nurses, we have a shortage of nurses and we have a huge backlog because we can't get enough of the space where people can go in and get clinical time. Well, let's fix that. But on the broader picture, with all the different industries, I like where we're going. There's some business location issues where we may have to send some people out of state to get training. That'll be more costly. But if we take advantage of these extra resources right now, and where we're stretched thin, or we're having to have somebody else help train the workers, if we transition during this decade, and this would be another one of the key factors to make us maybe the top state in the 2030s, we need to bring more of that here. I'd like to see more connectivity between U of A up to ASU, and then even going up north in terms of how do we develop the workforce at the specific skill set level that businesses need. And we have to do better advising in school so people know here are the different options. So anytime we look at one of these issues, you can actually spread it out into maybe another 20 different things to look at. But
Yeah.
we can walk and chew gum and pat our bellies and rub our heads or vice versa at the same time, but we can't do 10 different things. But a
Yeah.
group of people can do 10 different things. So we need a little bit more organization. And on the workforce side, there are a lot of groups working on workforce development. Maybe about a quarter, I think, are doing some legitimate work. A lot of the other ones are floundering a bit. But it's still okay because they're talking about it. They're saying the workforce is important. And if we can just give them guidance on occasion so that there's a division of labor a little bit, we'll be a little bit more productive because it costs money to do this kind of stuff. And we don't want to be taxing the heck out of the public. We want fair taxation, but we have to make sure there's enough revenue. So I think the key is to be efficient, which goes back to how does a business survive? Return on investment, positive
Yeah.
ROI.
Yeah, no, again, bringing it back to, what really at the end of the day matters to our small businesses. There's two top issues on a regular basis with politics, with, sort of the year in, year out dialogue in the state of Arizona. Education and immigration. Those are the two that I feel like continuously come up. They come up in any type of polling. It's top five. It's continued conversation. I have 4 kids. In the next decade, they will all be entering, in fact, in the next 6 to 8 years, they will all be entering the workforce. Their education has been pretty volatile over the past 4 years between COVID, some of the release time that they were having when Red for Ed was happening several years ago. I'm looking at my senior in high school now going, man, they haven't had the same 4 year experience that I had that was pretty stable and consistent and predictable. They've lived unpredictable education lives and had massive shifts in curriculum that have changed the way that they were supposed to be learning. I think of Common Core math. I sit down and try to help them, and I consider myself somewhat of an educated individual, and I have a difficult time transitioning my brain from the way that I was taught to the way that they're being taught now. Not that it's wrong, just that that's not how I learned it. So, what type of workforce are we going to have in the next 8 to 10 years to be able to draw upon? And what sort of shifts do we need to be making within our small businesses in order to both capture, engage, and then also to have, individuals both reliable, predictable. I mean, predictability is a key component of small business. Knowing month to month where you're going to be and who you're going to have and when to grow. Can you just touch on sort of what we can be looking for in the next decade as it relates to our workforce?
The, the good news and the challenging news is that we have to do more growing from within. uh, Doing a recent analysis, we found that you have to grow our population rate 3 to 4 times greater than it is right now if we just want to maintain the status quo, but we don't continue to produce more workers from within. And that's not going to happen. We're in a situation where, again, we've been stretching ourselves thin, but there's solutions out there. And you have to blend those instead of what I hear a lot on, especially in education, is a
Mhm.
lot of complaining and a lot of saying we need $3 billion for this, or some idiot does a calculation saying we need another $7 billion if we want to get back to the 1980 level of something. It's no, it doesn't work. What are the individual things that we could fix? One of my favorite ones right now that's being discussed is the dual enrollment for
Mhm.
students so they can get college credit while they're in high school. What's that going to do? They're not going to be in college as long, which means their debt is going to be less. They're going to have additional opportunities for internships and apprenticeship programs if they're not taking, 6, 7, 8 classes each semester, and they'll be working earlier and they'll be paying more taxes. ROI on that, I don't see a situation where it would ever be negative. This is almost one of those permanently positive ones. So let's expand that if we can. Another one that I think that we need to work on, which would help small businesses, is I love the fact that we have guidance counselors in all the high schools. I feel like we need professional workforce development officers in the schools to complement the guidance counselors to give advice about these different opportunities in terms of where these kids might want to go to college. It could be the technical degree. That's going to have a huge ROI. But again, I'm the master of putting public policy ideas into the shape of a football and then handing it to a policymaker and watch them fumble it. And so, but I'm staying optimistic because if enough of us come up with those footballs, eventually one will go over the goal line. On the small business participation side, I love the idea of having the apprenticeship programs, all of those where you can basically get your next employee, but maybe have it subsidized to some extent. And I feel like we could do that where the state taxpayers benefit, because the benefit of enhancing that component of the workforce will be greater than what it would cost to put into a program where maybe it's supplemented, and that'll really help the rural communities. And we really have to have a different plan for rural versus urban, completely different economic story, but challenges and opportunities as well.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on. It's imperative that our rural communities have the same opportunities that our urban communities have, and it's something that we talk about at length in the city world is to ensure that that's at the forefront, at the top of our minds. I'm so glad you brought up a football analogy because it reminded me that this is a public service announcement for all of our small businesses who maybe just needed to think about things a little bit differently. But we do have the Super Bowl coming in 2023 and the NCAA Final Four in 24. We've got, our Phoenix Open back live and in person, Barrett Jackson car show and spring training. We are going to be really busy in Arizona over the next 3 years as it relates to large sporting events that draw big populations to our communities. What advice would you give to our small businesses? Because we don't want anybody to be left behind. We want our Arizona small businesses to be able to capture some of these opportunities. What do you tell them to do, Jim?
It varies. All small businesses are going to benefit in the end, and part of it has to do with we're going to have a lot of visitors here spending money. That's going to trickle. It's going to, I don't want to say trickle. It's going to bounce around the economy until people buy something from out of state, then the money leaves. But that's how it works. You bring in money, it bounces around, and then when it leaves, you got to make something else. But all of these events have huge tourism benefits. But at the same time, we're doing a better job of making use of them. I remember it was probably the mid 90s, no, early 2000s, where one of our economic recommendations was a joke during the Citizens Finance Review Committee. And it was just have the governor take somebody out for a cup of coffee. And then it's like, no, no, that was a joke. Here's our real list. But it wasn't a joke. It was strategic. We purposely did that. Well, now on these events, you do see the governor and the Commerce Authority and the mayors and other leaders out there schmoozing with the business owners, getting feedback, trying to do business recruitment. So opportunities will come. And one thing that I think small businesses would like to see, and I can't remember if we included this in a report that we did a while back, but I'll provide a sheet to ASBA. is we always like to run when we do those economic impact models when a big business is going to be locating in an area or even a small one. We like to do it, we expanded it so there's a breakdown of if you have 100 workers or 1,000 workers in a base industry, here's all the spin-off jobs. You just hear, well, there's extra jobs. Another two are created for every one. Well, where are they? They're in 100 different locations. And you can really see how every tiny small business or every subcategory of a business can potentially benefit from this. And that's one of my favorite things to include in reports or presentations because it gives policymakers perspective how small businesses are indeed needed to support the bigger ones as suppliers, but also taxpayers and having a significant impact. The calculation I have on my screen right now is impact of small businesses in the state, 10 billion annual revenues of state and local governments, 10 billion. Small businesses are supporting the state is supporting the larger businesses, and then it goes down, but everybody's helping one another. But I think I'll send that ASBA's way in case they want to post it. It's a pretty cool little document that really is enlightening.
That's a great follow-up item after this. So everybody look for that in your inbox. I'm sure Genesis and Emma over at ASBA will get that out into the hands of everyone who's participated today. So thanks for offering that, Jim. Grant money. This last year and a half, there's been a lot of PPP, a lot of other types of small business loans and grants offered. Do we expect that to continue, or sort of has the spigot been turned off in some ways? And what should our small businesses be doing to prepare one way or the other?
So we went through the period of the initial benefit or the initial economic recovery package is focused on how can we keep these businesses afloat because it was going to be helping the individuals. Then we had a lot of individual subsidies. Now we're shifting to broader government spending on infrastructure and things like that. So it's still going to be trickling to everybody, but it's just a little bit of a different mechanism. The federal government has to stop spending at the rate that it is eventually. And so, regardless of political affiliation, one group might be more aggressive with spending than another. We just can't afford this. And so, we're going to have to get back down to normal conditions. You're going to see the Fed pull back. You're going to have to see the federal government pull back to avoid maybe something very devastating, a horrific recession before the end of the decade, as opposed to maybe some mild slowing. So, after this next year, there's still going to be some grant monies available. It just does not look like the government entities are going to be able to blow through all that money if they do it in a responsible way. And we have to remember this is still our tax money. Just because it went to DC and then got mailed back doesn't mean that it's not our money. This is money that came out of our pockets. So we want it to be used in a proper way. But you're going to see you're going to see less subsidizing of the private sector going forward. You're going to see higher interest rates. Inflation is going to be a problem a little longer. But again, if you can get through this latter part of the storm, great opportunities await.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. That's incredibly helpful. We have time for about 2 questions from the audience. So if you guys want to go ahead and put those questions in the chat, I have about 16 or 17 more for Jim in the 10 minutes that we have remaining of our session today. So I'll have to hold on to a few of those. We talk about trade partners in Arizona and opportunities, and I've been paying attention a lot, obviously, to transportation, but also to what's happening along our border cities. Douglas, Nogales, San Luis, in different cities that have ports. First of all, it's mind-boggling how many agencies they all have to interact with in order to get anything done. But Douglas was just provided funding through the federal infrastructure package for a 2-port solution, which really increases capacity and opportunity in Douglas to be able to get goods across the border, not to mention make it safer and easier for individuals who are working on both sides of the border on a regular basis to be able to get back and forth. It's been a huge challenge over the last 18 months. I know you've done some analysis on what border and trade partners offer to both us as a state and also both from a workforce and from a product development standpoint? Do you see that increasing, not just because of the influx in dollars, but because of the needs, especially with our supply chain challenges?
Yes. So different points of perspective. Let's stick with Douglas. We've been doing a little bit of work with them. Uh, they're going to have more economic activity, but the key is how can they capture some of the economic activity? So our border communities are going to need to figure out a way of maximizing those opportunities from the infrastructure. We've been talking about a lot about broadband. Well, broadband itself, if we just bury some wires in the ground, it's not going to do any good. You got to hook into it. And so the real economic benefit comes from once you have that foundation, how do you hook into it and make use of it? So I feel like there will be additional opportunities, more going on in Nogales as well. But we have opportunities for a more efficient localized supply chain between Sonora and Arizona. There's still going to be discussions about an expanded port in Mexico. There's discussions about the federal government in Mexico providing more monies for these infrastructure items. And if we partner properly, we could have a joint benefit between Sonora and Arizona above and beyond if we didn't partner. And so, more than any other time, I'm excited about that. And I know that the new governor of Sonora is very excited about looking at these economic development opportunities. And so, I'm hoping that our lead policymakers will continue to have that discussion, but also economic development entities and even some private consultants on occasion.
That's super insightful and helpful. I have been taking some notes today, Jim, and as I like to do at the end of these, I'm just sort of going to summarize what we've talked about so that I can capture the high points. There were a lot today, and I really do appreciate your insight, your knowledge, your ability to see issues and challenges from a whole new perspective, and the way you're teaching us to do that with our small businesses. So thank you so much. One of the things that you mentioned that we absolutely need to be watching as signs and indicators of the economy is both interest rates and inflation, that we need to be paying attention to those things. And we need to ensure that we're mindful and thoughtful about how we're spending those dollars. That workforce is a challenge, especially because there's been pressure on wages and also workforce development. So again, a key component for us to be looking out for. I do have in my notes that Jim Rounds is running for office someday, and a call to action to each of you to please consider your gifts, skills, talents, abilities, and experiences and how they can add to our state. We need policymakers that have had small business perspective and that can translate what's happening in the real everyday world to policy. Arizona is in the top 5 for income growth, as well as other areas. And so we will continue to grow as a state. The outlook for 22 and 23, according to Jim Rounds, our expert, is excellent. And so we want to make sure that you all, as small business owners, are able to capture that. Think of whatever challenges you have in a whole new way and know that ASBA is there to support you. That we will be looking out for you both at the policymaker level, but also as we look for resources and also for ways that we can shore you up as you make this transition from 2021 to 2022. Partnerships, collaboration, we are here for you. And at that point, I'm going to turn this over. I know we've got our closeout, our sponsor today. So if we can go ahead and move to them. Hey, there he is. Hey, Thomas, how are you?
Hello. Well, thank you, Jen and Jim. Wonderful presentation today. And for all the viewers, on behalf of the Arizona Small Business Association and Integro Bank, thank you for joining us today for what's been a very insightful discussion about Arizona's small business economy. Today's conversation certainly underscores how critically important small businesses are to the health of the economy, both here in Arizona and nationally. My name is Thomas Insera, Chairman, CEO, and founder of Integro Bank. My decision to launch Integro Bank was rooted in the recognition that small business was very impactful in my own life by helping to lift me up and becoming the first person in our family to attend and graduate college. And after COVID, my colleagues and I realized that there was a devastating and disproportionately adverse impact on small businesses. So we felt compelled to act by launching the bank. Our research allowed us to learn that 99% of all the companies in Arizona are classified as small businesses because they have 100 employees or less. However, only 4.5% of all the lending activity from the banks goes to help those small businesses. So that means here in Arizona, small businesses were starved for credit at a time when they most needed access to credit. We also learned in our research that Arizona as a state ranks 50th out of all 50 states as having the fewest number of banks and bank branches per capita in the nation. And despite being among the most populous and fastest growing cities, Phoenix actually has the fewest number of banks of any major city. So this acute shortage of banks in general and the shortage of credit availability for small business has hurt Arizona in the past. Without that access to capital during periods of stress, it's no surprise that many of the small businesses were not able to weather the storm. So while banks in the past have only provided 4.5% of their loans to small business, our objective at Integro Bank is to provide 20 times that level of support to the small business community. And also, since cash flow is so critically important to a small business, we've become the first bank in the United States to introduce Integro 360, which is an important tool to help small businesses better manage their cash flow. We believe that having access to that improved cash flow better positions small businesses to help them improve their growth, but yet it also helps to protect them during periods of uncertainty. So together, the Arizona Small Business Association and Integro Bank are committed to helping Arizona's small businesses grow and increase employment. We're committed to doing our part by providing access to credit and these cash flow management tools to help small businesses thrive. So on behalf of Integro Bank team, thank you to all the small businesses out there. Thank you to the policymakers who will be assisting in the effort to support a pro-business economy. And thank you to ASBA for your continued support in the small business community. We appreciate everyone tuning in and learning more about the significant economic impact that small businesses have and how we all can continue to support them. As a follow-up, ASBA will be sending out a briefing of the key takeaways from today's event, as well as a full recording of the session. So on behalf of ASBA and Integro Bank, thank you for joining us today, and we wish you and your family a very happy and healthy holiday season. Thank you, everyone.